lobby. Let's all go to the lobby, lobby. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.
Hello, horror hounds, and welcome to Now Slaying, an It's Lace podcast production where we break down the latest and greatest in the world of horror. I'm your not-so-humble host, Colton.
I'm Rowan.
And today on the show, as you've no doubt seen from the episode title, we're going to be trying something new with doing a Now Slaying double feature. So for the first half of the show, we'll be focusing on the new prehistoric horror Out of Darkness, with the latter half focusing on Lisa Frankenstein, considering both were released in theaters last weekend, February 9th, 2024, exclusively in theaters. So if you're here for Lisa Frankenstein, use the podcast chapters to skip to the latter half of the show, as for now, it's all about Out of Darkness. So Rowan, we'll kick things off the same way we usually do. I know Out of Darkness was a movie we brought up in our 2024 preview episode, but I can't remember if this was one you were looking forward to or not.
I was interested in it. Obviously, if people recall from that episode, I was a madman on my research all the night before. So, I watched the trailer and I was reading about the movies. So I was obviously very interested, especially with, the language of this film and how it was made. I would say I was, somewhat looking forward to it. A prehistoric horror movie is not something that's that common. So I was very interested in that premise. What about you?
Yeah, I'm kind of in the, a similar boat. Prehistoric horror isn't really something I can think of too many examples off the top of my head. I guess Prey was, not prehistoric, but, in the olden days to some degree. And honestly, something that was set even in this kind of time period would be 10,000 BC, which I don't know if our listeners have heard of that movie or if you've heard of that movie, but that's from probably 15 years ago at this point. So yeah, it's not really something I can kind of really put my finger on if something that happens too often. And obviously, I'm a big dinosaur kid. So I was kind of hoping that there might be some dinosaurs in this or, some just prehistoric creatures to some degree. And, we'll save some of that for the spoiler discussion. But it was something that, I was cautiously optimistic for. I did have some reservations about it that, of course, if you're curious about that, you can probably just listen to the 2024, looking ahead episode that we did. But yeah, I was cautiously, interested and optimistic that this could turn out to be good. I knew that it would probably be a little indie movie, judging by you can't really make everything look prehistoric very easily. You probably just shoot in the mountains for most of the movie or whatever. But yeah, it was something that I was kind of surprised that it actually came to theaters. And, I'm happy it did, so we could do this episode on it. So, was this the best showcase for prehistoric horror? Or is it a genre best left in the past? Well, before we get into that, let's get into the trailer.
Panarashum. Teesin berraffin en susullardes.
Mi gente ramp.
Laukatakut.
Öblek nefsin, kokoret efsin.
نفسي نعيش وتيبقى
تركون.
What you just heard is from Out of Darkness, directed by Andrew Cumming and written by Ruth Greenberg, and the story is as follows. In the Old Stone Age, a disparate gang of early humans search for a new homeland. But when darkness falls, they soon fall prey to an unseen danger, and the clan must band together or otherwise go extinct. Now, here on Now Slang, we like to keep things relatively spoiler-free up front before getting into the more in-depth spoiler-filled discussion. So, Rowan, what are your spoiler-free thoughts on Out of Darkness?
So I will say first, which I think is the strong point of this movie, is I thought the cinematography was really good on this. Like, I thought a lot of the kind of landscape shots and stuff, it was a little higher end than I thought it was necessarily going to be. It kind of gave me I don't know, like a Lamb, like A24 type Scandinavian like vibe.
Okay.
Yeah. You know, like we're in like Iceland or like Greenland or something like that. So, you know, I thought that was pretty fantastic. I thought the score was really good in this one. That also was very notable. Obviously, I'm starting with that because the movie starts with that. And there's a score throughout this that I thought was really strong. And obviously, I always talk about that's like the first thing I'm kind of looking for is music. Unfortunately, I was saying to Colton before we started recording that my theater was obviously having some technical issues with this. I don't think this was high on the priority list. There was no poster at the theater. They just had a white sheet printed out of like 8x11 paper that just said like Out of Darkness. Like someone just printed Out of Darkness. And
Insane.
That was up. But basically, I was only getting sound out of the front of the speaker, so everything was very low. There was a little bit of surround sound, but I'm assuming the speakers weren't properly working. So I was only getting random sound effects out of 2 speakers of the 20 or whatever they have in there. So obviously I was a little let down by the sound of this. So, if the actual sound was great on this film, I'm not the one to bring that up. Colton will bring that up, I'm sure.
Yeah, it was something that I thought was pretty good throughout. I wouldn't say great. Like, I think a lot of kind of, let's say, like the creature sounds or the noises you hear in the night, some of them sounded really like artificial, and then some of them just kind of seemed a little bit like anachronistic, like out of place. For me, the score actually wasn't that great. I just thought it felt very, I don't know, I guess kind of like your usual horror fare. Like, I don't know how to describe it other than like this clacking wood sound, like clack, 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 like, trying to amp up like the tension as like, let's say people are running through the woods or what have you. It just felt like I've heard this sort of score quite often, whereas a lot of things in this movie, just by the nature of being prehistoric horror, as we've now said probably half a dozen times, is something that's a little bit different. So I was kind of hoping that the score would maybe lean into some of these like tribal, flavor and kind of bring that. But yeah, in terms of like the actual sound effects and sound design, it didn't really take me out of it. And I didn't have the issue like you had. My theater, don't get me wrong, it wasn't in a big theater. It was kind of like sandwiched away towards the back, but it was a good theater. It wasn't one of the ones with like a crackling speaker the entire time or like a little tear in the screen or something like that. Like it was the sort of experience where me and the 5 other people in there, we could be fully engrossed in the viewing experience. But yeah, keep going.
I should have known I was in trouble because when I went in, they obviously hadn't cleaned the theater either. So there was there must have been
where were you? This is awful.
This is kind of interesting because I was in it's called the Park Lane Cineplex in Halifax, which is like the ritzy one.
Before.
Yeah, it's like the fancy one. There must have been something 3D playing in there before because there was just 3D glasses everywhere, all over the floor, in the cup holders, garbage everywhere. Like, obviously something played beforehand, and they were like, the 5 people that came and saw this movie, fuck those guys. They can just sit in the dirty-ass theater, watch their prehistoric horror film. I will say, pretty much exactly, from the 2024 preview episode, my worries about this confirmed. It was really hard for me to focus on this film, even if you've only seen the trailer, from all the fantastic looking primitive humans. The leader of the squad is rocking a very fashionable fade and goatee. Like everyone has their hair done like $300 haircuts going on.
Well, I don't know if I'd go as far as say everybody has, their hair done, but
Wow,
I
they
will
had
say
that old weird guy or whatever that he
the
looked
old
dirty.
weird guy doesn't, and then also kind of like I would say like the second in command of like the men, in the tribe, I guess. Like he doesn't have really like a modern haircut. It looks like his was actually cut with rocks. I found his was. I don't know. It looks like he went to like a Supercuts and he's like, "Yo, fuck my shit up." Like that's what it looked like to me.
I'm just saying, whatever like primitive tribe these guys are from, it's only popping out like good-looking people. So
yes, that's true. I do think, especially the facial hair was very distracting to me because I was kind of like, okay, sure, whatever. Maybe you could figure out how to cut off locks of hair. That's fine to get a closer, more modern cut or a more buzz cut look. A little bit, chop it up a little bit. But in terms of the facial hair, yeah, it looked like these people were, they were shaving with like your Gillette Fusions, you got the Mach 4s going or whatever.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing, which is kind of my own fault, is like I got there a little early, so I'm just like browsing about the movie and I'm looking at Letterboxd and stuff. And someone in Letterboxd brought up their pants, so the entire movie I couldn't stop looking at these guys' pants.
Really?
And then I was
Were
like,
they modern pants? I never even noticed.
the pants are pretty tight. And like at some moments it looks like leggings. At other moments it's just there's like stitches that I'm like, this looks like I'm looking at a pair of like Gucci jeans. Like the stitching is like really well done. It just everything looked too put together for me. Even like the jackets that are supposed to look like fur, like everything was just like too clean for me in this to like buy in to this. Is supposed to be 45,000 years ago.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I really found that distracting for me to like get into the movie.
That's interesting because I do have a note of that the hair leaves a lot to be desired. But I did think that the makeup and the costuming wasn't terrible. So I guess I never noticed this pants issue. And, I will say there are moments in the movie where they do make them look dirty. Once again, I just kind of wish with a movie like set in this age, like it doesn't have to be your traditional Hollywood actors starring in this, or at least, attractive looking people. I also wish they'd do stuff like to dirty up their teeth more, or just generally their fingernails, just generally make them look gross, right? Because, I mean, we all know you'd be nasty if you lived 45,000 years ago, and no one's bathing in this movie at any point. So, it should be kind of gross, and I think I would have appreciated if the technicals on that front were a little bit better. I don't think it was that bad. It didn't like take me out of the movie other than kind of the facial hair, but I didn't also notice, let's say, that if they were wearing leggings,
It was weird things like that. And then I felt that I feel like what I want that, no one would make because no one would go watch it. It was also like, I just felt like the communication and everything between the tribes people in this was like pretty evolved. Like there was a lot of like evolved emotions going on and relationships. And like some of it I understood. Like obviously back then, like I think things are a little more black and white. So obviously like, if you're a woman, you're kind of like your whole purpose is like for the men and like reproduction, especially like a nomad type tribe. But I just felt there was like just like complicated emotions of like feelings of other tribe members, how they feel about that, all this stuff where I was just curious. Like I said, I'm not a historian. I don't know anything. That I was like, I wonder how realistic these kind of, feelings would be processed back then.
I'm curious to pick your brain on that a little bit more. So you have to try and remind me to ask you about this in the spoiler discussion, because I'm curious as to what specific feelings or dynamics in the tribe that you're pointing out, because I actually didn't find it too bad. Once again, I didn't have too many issues with the way like the personalities or the relationships in amongst the tribe were kind of shown off. I will say that they're all archetypes that we've seen kind of a few times before. Specifically, I thought that the performance by the main lead, Safia Oakley Green as Bea, I thought she was pretty great overall. I do kind of wish that they amped up her character or made her a little bit more of a badass or ruthless. I think there were some moments that I'll probably get into in the spoiler-filled discussion that I was just kind of like, I wish this aspects of her personality, or, you know, this was like kind of brought up a little bit more in the beginning of the movie. I think I would have been more along for the ride with her character overall, and I think it would have made for a little bit more interesting of a movie. But I liked basically all the characters. I will say that Adam, he looked the part to a certain degree, like, you know, the leader, like he looked like he would be a leader. But once again, I kind of wanted him to have like that dirty dreadlocks hair and beard and whatnot, right? Like he had this like physicality to him that he looked like he'd have like some strength, and I can kind of understand how people would rally around him, especially when he has a spear in his hand. But it was the sort of thing where I was like, oh, that's the only one I thought was maybe a little bit miscast. Kind of going on what you said, like I also thought the camera work was pretty good as well. Like I noted that there was a 360 shot, for example, that's kind of framing them all as they're like afraid in the woods near each other. Then it just kind of goes past a tree and it transitions to them walking through the woods, and I was like, oh, that was a pretty seamless transition there. Or there's stuff like, you know, some upside down camera work. There's
don't get me started on that.
Well, it's overdone for sure. It's something we've seen. Like I feel like Midsummer brought it back into vogue. That's the first thing I can remember within the last like 5 or 6 years that did it. But when
he
they
did it multiple times in this movie. Like,
oh, did they? I noticed in one key spot. But,
yeah, I think I counted like 3. I think he did it 3 or 4 times.
Oh god,
the upside down shot. Because I was like, is this all we got? Like, I was like, there's no way this guy didn't just get out of school or something and wanted to show off.
I never noticed it that much. There was one that was very much the traditional, like, our world is being turned upside down sort of thing, which is what everybody goes to nowadays when they're doing that. Oh, we're leaving our home and we're going to an unfamiliar place. Let's frame it upside down and we'll slowly rotate the camera, you know, as we kind of get our bearings, which I noticed at one point was a little bit on the nose. But there's also some interesting stuff with, like, let's say like northern lights at a certain part in the movie, or just, you know, a lot of the way it's lit with torchlight and caves or, you know, whatnot. I thought it was pretty competent for what it was. Don't get me wrong. It's definitely very underlit in terms of like a lot of harsh shadows. It very much feels, you know, people are just kind of, you know, phasing into the darkness, right? and people approaching out of the darkness. You know, you lose them pretty easily. But I did like it. It was kind of a vibe overall. And the one kind of other thing I'll point at too is I did think it had some nice like locations and vistas. Like you said, this very much felt Scandinavian. And to me, when I was watching it, I thought it just very much looked like they made the most of their location budget. They were just going around. They found very picturesque vistas to shoot at because clearly they didn't have a whole lot of budget for a lot of this movie. So it was just like they made the most with what they had, and in a lot of these locations that I thought were gorgeous. And yeah, I don't know, in terms of like some negatives with the movie, like once again, we already kind of touched on, you know, the hairstyling and, you know, the costumes and whatnot. For me, I think just the pacing overall is pretty slow. I definitely found myself wandering, like my brain was wandering alongside them, basically being like, oh, how would have I like kind of punched this up? Like I'm bored. Like if I'm rewriting your movie to a certain degree as I'm watching it, obviously I'm not fully invested, because usually, you know, as someone who we watch movies through somewhat critical lens, obviously, to discuss them on the show, if I'm doing that while I'm watching it and not like while I'm kind of writing my notes and kind of forming my opinions afterwards, then we have a little bit of a problem. And that's what I found in this one. I was kind of drifting off a little bit in terms of just like in my own head. Because a lot of this movie is like just walking from place to place, essentially. You know, some conversations here and there, but a lot of it's just walking together as a tribe with a couple of spears drawn across, you know, picturesque vistas. And it was just, you know, a little slow at times. And I will say the marketing for this movie, marketing it as a horror movie, is maybe a little bit not misleading, I guess. But there's like they try and do a jump scare probably within the first 5 minutes. And then the rest of it is kind of like noises in the night for a long portion of this movie. And it feels like almost more of a survival movie to me than a horror movie.
I had the exact note of a question I was going to ask you, which is this a horror film or is it a survival thriller? Because, yeah, I felt it was a little off market. I was going to say, I agree with you, too, about the pacing, which to me is almost unacceptable because this is clock's only a little over an hour and 20 minutes.
Oh yeah, an hour 27. It definitely felt longer than that. 100%. I know you like to kind of like criticize movie lengths. Basically, I find most of the time when they get over 90 minutes, this one, I will agree with you. It's under 90 minutes. It certainly felt longer. This felt like probably like an hour 45, hour 50 to me when I was watching it.
There was a guy that walked out in my theater.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. Which to me was just my biggest issue with it was the tension. Like, I just was like, there should be way more tension right now than I'm feeling. I just feel like they didn't utilize, how I didn't have that connection built, I guess.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I'm saying, where I wish they amped up the main character a little bit more. I wish we knew a little bit, like, inside of her head. Gave us more to go off, because there are moments, especially early in the movie, that there's some harrowing shit happening to her or around her. And there are moments like, let's say, when she could, like, seize power or betray someone or clearly, like, kind of make people at odds with each other. Like, a little bit more scheming. She could definitely do that, and it probably would have made the movie a little bit more interesting. Whereas any of that, if it does happen, it certainly doesn't happen until, much later in the movie where, we can discuss what happens in the spoiler discussion. But it's literally like, a little bit more internal characterization and a little bit more of, like, let's say, a personal quest or a vendetta or, wanting to seize power for yourself or something. There could have been something that definitely could have elevated some of these, interpersonal tensions and maybe made it a little bit less of a slog at times. I guess.
Yeah, no, I agree with that.
The one other thing I really want to quickly mention is that I do really like that all of this movie is in a foreign language. I do think that's very interesting. I think it is like a point of differentiation. I remember when we discussed Prey on this show, it was something that I was really bummed by, that it wasn't all in like the Comanche dialect, where this movie, they do go out of their way to have the whole movie is definitely filmed in a foreign language. I think it's called Tola, and I just thought, like, man, these actors are kind of killing it. They're all speaking to each other in obviously a language they 100% don't understand. This is, I assume, is like some sort of ancient dialect. There's no way this is like a spoken language, is there?
Well, I looked it up. What I saw was that it's based on a language, but this is actually a made-up language.
Okay.
They made it specifically for the film.
Oh, yeah, look, you click on Tola and it's a fictional language. But then that's even more impressive to me because it was something like similar to Dothraki or something, right? Which obviously in Game of Thrones, I know that was a made-up language, but they put in the work to basically make it feel like it all made sense. When they were speaking to each other in Tola in this movie, I thought it was like, it was taken from somewhere. It felt like an authentic ancient language to me. So, that's very impressive for, once again, a movie of this size. And I thought all the people that obviously they were speaking in a completely foreign language, I thought they did a great job. So that's another little, point I want to give the movie. With that, anything before we get into the spoiler-filled discussion? Would you recommend this, or how do you feel?
I'm gonna give it like a light recommend.
Yeah.
This is one that I feel like, you could probably wait till this, you can stream this or something. Like, big screens are always great, but I almost feel, and maybe it's just my experience because I had the technical issues and all that, but I was kind of like, if I was maybe at home, middle of the night, all the lights off and everything by myself, like maybe I could have got a little more immersed in this. So yeah, I'm gonna give it a light recommend. What would you say for this?
Yeah, I'd probably go the other way. I think if I would have watched this at home, I would have wound up on my phone for a couple of good periods of time, whereas in the theater, I'm always a good theater viewer. I never check my phone, like in the movies. So it's like I am completely engrossed or in my head a little bit when I'm watching a movie in the theater. So it's the sort of thing where I probably would recommend it to a very certain type of person. Like if you're interested in something that's obviously a prehistoric horror, maybe more of a survival movie that's, a slow pace, but it does have some things to offer that, we can discuss in in a couple minutes here. But, just don't go out expecting this to be Night Swim or something, or like your traditional horror movie.
Yeah, nothing can be that good.
Yeah, exactly. Nothing can be as great as Night Swim. So it's not your traditional horror movie. That's in theaters this weekend. If you want that, probably more so see Lisa Frankenstein in terms of like a traditional horror movie. But yeah, I'd recommend it if, what we discussed here sounds interesting at all. So yeah, it's kind of a light recommendation from both of us. And with that, I think it's time to cut to the spoiler discussion for Out of Darkness. We are now in our spoiler discussion for Out of Darkness, so if you have not seen Out of Darkness, it's time to tune out and come back once you've seen the movie, or keep listening if you simply don't care. Rowan, there was something you were getting at. I think it was with the character relations.
Yes.
Or like how certain relationships felt too modern for you. I never got that, so that's what I want to start with. I'm just curious.
To me, I was thinking about, obviously we have Bea and what did we say? Is Gear?
Yeah, Gear, who he winds up being. The basically the second leader.
The second leader.
Yeah, after Adam is killed.
And obviously, he's got feelings for Bea, and he obviously knows because they live in this society that, like, Adam is going to claim her once she's reached womanhood, because obviously, back then they're nomadic and stuff. You're trying to have as many babies as possible because you're trying to, expand your tribe. And, back then babies are dying, which we do find out that, they've had many attempts at having children.
Yeah, I think it was Ave or Ave, however you pronounce it. Obviously there's an Adam and Eve aspect of this, Adam and Ave or Ave, where she's had, I think, 3 miscarriages, and this is the 4th baby that's going to die inside of her, essentially. So, yeah, it's definitely a struggle.
It was just the things, so obviously, like, they build on this, like, jealousy factor, but it's not, like, a jealousy of like, I want to be the leader. Like, it was a jealousy that they had this, like, genuine connection, and, he just didn't want, her to be this guy's and stuff, and it just, like I said, I'd have to research more, but I feel like primitive cultures then, that probably was, like, it just probably wasn't a thing that you thought about. You're just like, yeah, okay. Like, this is how it is. I would imagine especially like nomadic tribes back then, anything I ever read, they were that small. So there would be lots of like inbreeding, and it would be like these guys would all have babies from these women. So I kind of, I understood because it's for a modern audience, so you like want something in there that kind of creates a larger story, a larger narrative.
It's interesting because I never got like the will they won't they tension at all, I guess. Whatever I saw with Gier or whatever towards Bea, I thought it was just more like, oh, Adam's an asshole, he's like, mistreating her or trying to rape her or whatever, which once again, these concepts back then probably wouldn't exist, sadly, but it was just sort of, I got that more so, and almost like an ownership aspect. Like, I think he wanted her to breed with her, but I don't know if it was like a romantic thing, really. It was more so just jealous of what another guy has. But yeah, I guess we were saying, like, some of those concepts are modern, but even when I'm trying to frame them through this, like, obviously this toxic masculine perspective or whatever, about like ownership and whatnot. But yeah, I guess it was just something that didn't bump for me when I was watching it. And also I just didn't buy for for a second that Bea and Gier would ever wind up together. Like, there's a moment in this movie where it's like, okay, this is going to be like a girl boss movie at a certain point. Like, she's going to seize power, she's going to prove that she's just as like strong as these men, that she's a great leader, that she has what it takes to survive, where a lot of people in this movie don't. And that was kind of like what I felt like I was waiting to happen for so much of this movie. And it kind of stems back as early as, I think, with like kind of the sexual assault scene between Adam and Bea, where it doesn't actually happen, but it's, it's basically going to happen, but it's interrupted by, this creature screaming in the night, essentially, and frightens the shit out of him, and then she, scurries back to the fire. And it was the sort of thing where when I was watching it, I was like, I almost wish that she used her, stone at that point that she had in her pocket and, like, stabbed him or something, and then he just slowly bled out overnight, and then whatever happened in the darkness, nobody knew, and, they thought it was a monster that did it or something like that. I kind of wanted him killed much earlier in the movie, and then you would have known that Bea as a character at least had some drive or motivation to kind of become the leader, or to at least stand up for herself. Because obviously this does happen at a certain point in the movie, but this happens probably 2/3 of the way through the movie, essentially. It's like long after Adam's dead. It's after Gier has like led them in circles, and then essentially she's like, well, you know what, the men aren't getting it done, so I'm gonna get it done, pretty much is what happens.
Well, and that's kind of the issue with, we talked about in the spoiler free section, like the tension and stuff, and I think that's one of the difficult things with this being such a small cast is, you don't want to kill everyone off really quick. But I also felt, especially when we get into, like, okay, there is some sort of monster or something, it's killing people, but we don't really have enough people, I think, to build the tension throughout the movie. It's like he takes the son, the young son, you know, he kills Adam. But like that's it. That's really the kills of the you know the quote unquote monster. Like I just felt like there could have been more scariness of the darkness. Like I didn't feel that the darkness was appropriately used most of the time.
Yeah, that was sort of thing where once again I think the taking of the kid in the beginning of the movie is like a misstep for this movie because that just feels like too traditional of a horror trope to me. I think what would have been scarier, once again, is for at least the tribes people, not for the audience necessarily, is if Bea was out, you know, changing her moss pad, which, you know, ladies comment on would moss and like berries and rocks or whatever she has in there be a good substitute for tampons. But she's out there kind of changing that, and he kind of comes out and, you know, tries to assault her. That's why I was hoping that she would essentially kill him, leave the body far enough from, you know, the fire. And then in the night, in the darkness, you know, obviously their leader doesn't come back. They can't go out and search for him. Kind of like these horrors kind of transpire overnight. They don't know what's out there. And then, you know, maybe you hear the scream or the cry of the creature. So that, you know, leads to them believing that, hey, maybe he did die from a creature. And then we all know that obviously, you know, Bea is the monster. Is there a real monster out there? Who knows, type of thing. It just would have made for a little bit more of like an insular story as they're wandering without a leader. And I think it could have built more opportunities for kind of conflict throughout the movie. And also, once again, some like stabbing in the back. Obviously, I don't want her killing off people all throughout, but I think in that moment, I think most people would have been completely on Bea's side if she did happen to, you know, shank him with that rock she had in her pocket for 90% of the movie, you know?
I was going to say another thing, too, because I feel bad, because I feel like I'm just shitting all over this movie. But, you know, I did want to say, like, when Adem dies, way more gruesome than I thought it was going to be. I thought that was pretty good. Like,
yeah.
The horror side, you know, we already said, is this horror survival thriller. That was definitely reaching in some horror bag.
I think once again, like, I think like some of the prosthetics or some of the kills in particular, I think they do lean more horror than survival. But once again, it all depends, right? Because, you know, a bone protruding from, you know, someone's shin is like very much, you'll see that in numerous survival movies. But, you know, someone getting essentially their jaw smashed with a mallet off screen, you know, and it's like hanging off and he's like drowning in his own blood. It's like, well, that's probably a little bit more horror, you know, because, you know, a creature or something caused it, right? So it leaves our minds to wander. And that's the thing too, with this beat in particular, I like that she was the one that kind of stepped up and showed that she was the only one that could put him out of his misery. Or also like, hey, was there a little bit of malevolence there? Which, once again, I wish we kind of knew a little bit more what her intentions were there.
Yeah.
Because I very much thought she was doing it to kind of put herself as like, okay, none of you guys are clearly like the alpha. None of you guys are fit to do what needs to be done. So I will do it. And it happens like right after it as well, where they eat him as well because they're all starving to death. I was like, okay, they're very much framing her that she's going to essentially be the leader and she's willing to do whatever it takes to be that and kind of survive. But very much like once the morning comes, she just falls in line behind, you know, Gill and follows him. And I'm like, well, that's kind of, if it just felt like a bit of a misstep for me. It's like I would have preferred her just to basically be like, yeah, obviously back then, I know feminism doesn't exist, you know, but it was just like for this sort of movie with this small amount of people, I feel like it could have made sense if she was like, yo, I killed the leader. I made us all eat his body. So now we're all alive. And, you know, I know how to use this spear, so how about you guys just back up and follow me?
Yeah.
You know? I think it could have still made sense. Like, obviously, some people will probably be complaining about how modern all of that is, but it was just like in the story that they were kind of telling, I was like, I think this would have fit fine.
Well, and it would have added to the mystique, because I thought, like, you know, she's the one that kind of brings up, like, all right, we need to, like, cannibalize them. We're starving to death.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, Adam was not that good of a leader, because they couldn't find any food. He was leading them to a land that had no food and sucked. But to me, you know, one of the beats that we didn't bring up is the fact that, you know, they make sure a couple times, you know, that Bea is a stray and is obviously from another tribe, another somewhere. So then I had kind of, you know, then I was starting to think, I'm like, oh, like, you know, is
she leading them to them or
like, did she eat the other tribe? Like, is she ruthless? Like,
yeah. Yeah.
We don't really know anything about her. But yeah, like you said, they don't, even though I had those thoughts, I'm like, the movie's not giving me any crumbs to be like, oh, wait a second. Like, is there ulterior motives there? It's very just like, no, this is how it is.
Yeah, that could have been something to toy with as well, is like if we knew she was from a tribe of quote unquote savages by like what these people's, perception of what a savage would be. It would have been interesting if like we knew that she came from like a darker background or something like that for sure. One of the other moments where I thought they could have really leaned into this as well, was when Ave or Ave and Odal drag her through the woods to like basically sacrifice her. I was very much like, this almost feels like such a misstep for this character that she kind of didn't see this coming or couldn't like fight them off. You can't fight off an old dude and a pregnant lady, she seems very capable. So I was like, okay, she's getting dragged here, but she knows something, for example, or like she was going to get there and she was going to wound them. So obviously they wind up being the sacrifice or something. And they do wind up being the sacrifice, obviously. But I once again, I thought there was like some intention or some malice behind it where it's like, oh, I'll let them think that they have the upper hand and then I actually have it. I guess where a lot of these, like, there's small changes to the script where the outcome is still the same, but it's kind of the intention behind it is different to me. And it's just in my head with like just a little bit more character work or a little bit more like insular work on behalf of especially the protagonist. I think it just would have made some of these beats land a little bit stronger for me.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I did want to talk a second before I'm sure we're going to get into like, the quote unquote like twist and reveal.
Yes, yeah.
But I do want to say, the monster, I thought the monster looked pretty good, like in terms of what we initially think it looks like. It's, it's kind of got the, it's like standing up, almost slouching. It's got like kind of crow feathers going on.
Yeah, there's like some sort of like snout or something you get a
and
close-up
it's like
one point.
A skull. It gave me the vibe. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie, but there was like an independent horror movie in the like early 2000s called Feast, and
I know of it, but I've never seen it.
Yeah, it's like famous because it's from that like Project Greenlight TV show.
Gotcha.
Like,
okay,
that's what they made, and it really reminded me of the monsters from Feast. They had that very similar look, but also it has all these elements that are very familiar in like a folk horror type story. I thought the initial look of the monster was pretty good. I don't know, like, did you enjoy it or?
I think for me, maybe this is where maybe my screen was just a little bit dark. I wouldn't say I saw it too much until literally the quote unquote reveal of where it's directly approaching. Like, let's say like the moment I actually almost messaged you after, because I saw this movie a couple of hours before you. I almost said, watch when, the character is about to be sexually assaulted and let me know if you can see the monster. Because this was the sort of movie where for so much of it, I thought we weren't going to see the monster at all. Yeah. I thought this was going to like, the movie was going to end and it was going to be like, squint and you might be able to see something in the darkness. Because once again, I'm just going low budget, right? I was like, what is this creature? They can do a dinosaur. They can do some beast I don't know of. They can do, ancient humans, Neanderthals. They can do like anything with this concept. So I was like, I almost messaged you, but obviously we do get some reveals afterwards. But yeah, I think outside of like a snout or, something squinting, you see it in the darkness. You don't really get anything until you see the silhouette approaching, I guess was more so my thing. And when the silhouette was approaching, that was when I knew what it was. So it's probably, we should probably get into it. I think I spoiled it on the year ahead. I was like, oh, it's probably just going to be like Neanderthals or like ancient humans or something. And yeah, that's what it is. that's what
They literally say it's a Neanderthal. That's They name it, which I was kind of curious about. Like I said, I don't know enough about that time period that I was like, was everybody Neanderthals at the time? I was like, do these two different kind of people exist at the same time or?
Well, yeah, I think if you go back to like evolution, I think what most scientists and people believe now is basically that there was different species that I think Neanderthalis was slightly different from the Homo sapien, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay,
and then I think the Homo sapiens murdered the Neanderthals, or the Neanderthals like just died off due to, I don't know, let's say they didn't have the opposable thumb, or they didn't have mammary glands or something. Like, I don't know the biological differences, but there was something that gave us the evolutionary advantage over them. And it was kind of like when I was watching it, I was like, oh, they did enough prosthetic / makeup work on these people, or just casted well that they have, you know, like low brows and wide faces, that I was like, these kind of look like what I've seen in, you know, the few natural history museums I visited, that, you know, they looked Neanderthal like.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, you know, them like fighting against one another and kind of killing each other off was a little bit, you know, what I know from ancient history, or at least what people posit to have happened. So yeah, it didn't, I thought it was an okay reveal. I do think it's incredibly something that's very obvious. Obviously, I think most people, when you're going into like this Paleolithic era, as soon as you see 45,000 years ago, you're probably going to be like, well, there's two reasons for a dinosaur, you know, unless you're going completely mythological with some dragon or something like that. So it was essentially just like, the only real explanation is either you go completely supernatural and it's actually like some demon or malevolent force or the undead, or it has to be, you know, another essentially human like species, which
I'll be honest, I originally had thought, because I didn't think it was gonna go Neanderthal or human. I
you were
thought
a little bit more surprised then. Yeah.
I had thought that, I was like, oh, you know what, maybe if it's not gonna be an actual monster, you know, it's gonna be like, especially before we see anything, I was like, oh, well, maybe it's like some sort of animal. Like, it's just like a, you know, like a
saber-toothed tiger.
Like something like that it's just like they wouldn't be familiar with, depending, because they do talk about like they're in a new area and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, obviously we land in, you know, probably the most basic a premise that we are the monsters.
Yeah, and that's kind of the thing too. Like, I don't really think some of the logic in the end of like where they really try and humanize the Neanderthals in the end really worked for me. Like, you know, like let's say stealing away Ave to honor her when she was still alive, although stabbed, and had just eaten, so she would have been like stronger than she was, like, let's say the couple of weeks before. It didn't seem like it was just purely to save her, or, you know, similar with stealing Heron right from the beginning of the movie, where he's like, he sat by the fire, they wouldn't know that they're starving or anything, you know, sort of thing. Like, they frame it through this guise of like, it was all a misunderstanding, this is tribalism, you know, like, you know, we're just as bad as them, or they're the same as us. And it was just like, well, there were like a lot of moments through the movie where they were the ones throwing the first stones, for sure. Like, obviously when Adam gets bludgeoned, he threw a spear into the woods, but, you know, from what I remember, it didn't hit anything or do anything. So it's just, you know, it was just, I don't know, there was a lot of it where I was like, this kind of tribalism thing that's kind of stapled on the end of the movie, it just didn't really work a whole lot for me, I guess. It was just like, I understand you kind of have to have that narrative beat of like, well, obviously Heron's still alive. Obviously they were taking care of him and feeding him. There has to be a little bit of like, you know, nature versus nurture stuff there, where like he was actually like starting to care for them and see like, oh, they're similar to us. But it was just something that, I don't know, some of it felt a little bit false to me, I guess. I don't think I really needed it a whole lot. I think we could have got it implicitly without it being explicitly said.
And the thing I will say is, to me, this is where I thought Bea worked best, because this is what I would have liked to seen, where this is where I'm like, okay, well, maybe Bea isn't that great of a person. And like, obviously, like, has a lot of trauma and, you know, things like that. We don't know what happened with her other tribe. But it's like, you know, this is like shoot first, ask questions last. Like, Bea is just fucking everybody up. Kids, moms, fathers, it doesn't matter. So to me, I was like, well, this makes her a little more interesting, because I'm like, okay, well, she kind of is the villain of this movie, because, you know, the son... Like, it seemed everyone else kind of wanted to be a little more gentle other than Adam. And, you know, and Bea just fucked shit up. But like you said, I just, that's what made me land.
Yeah, that's what kind of made me like her so much. Like, once again, I wanted to be earlier. I basically wanted this character that was hell-bent on survival at any cost. And if you got in her way, she'd cut you. Or she'd cut you down, you know, essentially. Because that's what we see in the latter half of the movie, for sure, within the last probably 20 minutes. But it was the sort of thing where I really wanted that right from the beginning. I wanted there to basically be a turning point, and I think for me, if it was, you know, the Simpson cut, it would have been right from that early scene, probably 10 minutes in the movie, where Adam tries to force himself on her. I think I would have just literally made something happen in the scuffle, he was being violent, you know, something where basically her only recourse was to use, you know, the little rock in her pocket that they set up, you know, a few minutes before that, and just do it right there. Kill him. We would know, like, where this character stands. We know these are brutal times. so it's not like a super like morality issue really. So it just winds up being, I think I would have liked that a little bit more, because I liked how unhinged and like her performance, I really bought like what the actress was doing in the last half of the movie. I really liked a lot of that. So it's just, I wanted to see it more from the beginning, where I find a lot in the beginning of the movie, outside of the camera kind of focusing on her and getting her reactions, she is a little bit more of like a passenger to like Adem and a couple of the other characters. And I understand like some people might like that as well, where it's like, okay, obviously once they fall, you know, the real protagonist is going to rise up. But I very much would have liked this to be a little bit more focused of her story of survival at any cost, and how that affected the people around her, and how they like can't even view her the same anymore. She's obviously a monster type of thing. I would have preferred that, which maybe that's a traditional movie we've seen numerous times, but I haven't seen it framed in like this Paleolithic era. You know, it's just, it would have been a little bit new enough for me that I've been like, sure, that was, you know, a little bit more interesting of a watch. And with that, anything else we should get into before rating this? No, all right.
I'm good.
So if you're new to the podcast, our review rubric is nay, okay, yay, or slay. So Rowan, what would you give Out of Darkness?
I mean, obviously people could probably tell that I wasn't really into this very much. I don't know, it just didn't hit for me. I thought it did have some high points. You know, like I said, I enjoyed the score. I enjoyed the cinematography. I did enjoy some of the monster stuff, but I didn't really feel any tension. You know, the twist was pretty predictable in it. So for me, I'm going to give it an okay. I'll be honest, I came in, I was going to give it an A. I really...
Oh, wow.
When I came out of it, I was like, man, that sucked. All 5 people that came out were all like, this was terrible. But yeah, no, the more I thought about it, there was some good stuff. I'd be interested, I think, to see like what Andrew Cummings does next. Maybe just stay away from 45,000 years ago. So, yeah, what about you, Colton? What would you rate it?
Yeah, for me, I liked it a little bit more than you, but I still think not enough to get me to a yay. And I think it's honestly just the pacing / how I felt like I was definitely in my head for probably 10 minutes of this movie, when it's only, you know, 82 minutes or whatever it is, 87 minutes, whatever. So, once again, you've heard us kind of go over it. I really like the main actress's name. The main actress, Safia Oakley Green's performance. I think she's very strong. I think some of like, you know, on how small of a budget it is, how it makes it feel still from another time period. I thought it was pretty good for the most part. Once again, the hair, you know, maybe if they're wearing leggings, I never noticed it. My screen was so dark, but you know, it didn't bump for me, and I liked some of the camera work. You know, let's maybe calm down on the upside down shots and movies going forward. For me, like really, it was just pacing, and I didn't think the score was all that great. The score wasn't bad, but it was just literally like whatever. I've heard it a dozen times. So yeah, it was mostly for me, which isn't always fair to hold against the movie. It was just, I was very much wishing that they did different things with the script. And the movie that we got was just less interesting, I think, than what I was hoping it was to be. So yeah, it's an okay from me, but it's not like a weak okay or anything. Like I was, with some tweaks, I think you could get this movie to a yay, almost even in post, I think. So that's the thing where it's like, This is pretty decent, but overall, I couldn't call it like a truly good movie, so that's where I have to land on an okay. And with that, I think it's time, you know, let's move out of the Stone Age and get into the ancient history of 1989. Let's you know, move on over to Lisa Frankenstein. Rowan, I know you're a fan of Diablo Cody to some degree, and I seem to remember we were both anxious to see what Zelda Williams, the daughter of the late Robin Williams, of course.
Yes.
How she would fare as a director. So were you looking forward to Lisa Frankenstein?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, like you said, Diablo Cody, you know, big fan here of Jennifer's Body. I absolutely love that movie. Her coming back to the horror realm, you know, excited me. And like you said, I was very interested to see what Zelda Williams did. I didn't know what kind of director, you know, obviously, you know, with Diablo Cody, it's gonna be like witty, that kind of stuff, kind of aimed at millennial humor and everything. Mm-hmm. But I guess I didn't necessarily, you know, before I saw the trailers and stuff, I just didn't know the vibe that like Zelda Williams was gonna bring to this movie. So yeah, I was pretty excited for this one. What about yourself?
This was one I'd say I was less excited for overall. I'm not a fan of Jennifer's Body, which I know, shame on me. I've heard it for years now. I will say that I thought Tully from a couple of years ago that Cody wrote was pretty good. And Juno, I will admit, in retrospect, it was a great movie. But at my time when I was, a teenager dating, it certainly didn't do us any favors for, on the hooking up front at that time when that movie came out. So, I harbored a bit of a grudge towards it. But, her attachment doesn't instantly make me interested in a movie.
Yeah.
And then when I saw the trailer, it was the sort of thing where it very much looked like Warm Bodies to me from, like, I don't know, 10 years ago to whatever it's been, which, if it's that long that I can kind of put my finger on like the rom-com loving the dead guy thing, it's like, okay, maybe it's fine to do another one of those. Obviously vampire stories do that all the time, but yeah, it was just the vibe I thought was a little bit off to me in the trailer. I thought it looked kind of cheap overall, so it's not something I was very much looking forward to. If it was like gun to my head, which would have you preferred to go see this weekend, I would have been like one of the 1% that I'd go, I'd rather go see Out of Darkness. So yeah, this not really my thing overall, but obviously we had to do this double feature anyways. So do we have another Jennifer's Body on our hands? Well, before we get into that, let's kick it on over to the trailer.
Are you hot for anyone? I wish I was with you. Your hand? I can't just get you new parts. Not until we bury the body.
I could get the clink for life or the electric chair,
But I don't want to die a virgin.
Lisa Frankenstein, rated PG-13, only in theaters February 9.
What you just heard is from Lisa Frankenstein, directed by Zelda Williams and written by Diablo Cody, and the story is as follows. A coming-of-age love story about a teenager and her crush, who happens to be a corpse. After a set of horrific circumstances bring him back to life, the two embark on a journey to find love, happiness, and a few missing body parts. Now, Rowan, we've already said, this whole song and dance. We always, where are my notes? I can't find them. Oh my God, my Google Doc is all messed up. Here on Now Slang, we like to keep things relatively spoiler-free up front before getting into the more spoiler-filled discussion. So Rowan, what are your spoiler-free thoughts on Lisa Frankenstein?
I had a really good time in this. You're going to win me over with pastels, with 80s music, with the 80s vibe. Unlike what you were saying beforehand, like I was super excited for this. I was ready for, in my notes, I have warm bodies vibes. I'm a huge warm bodies guy.
Oh God. Okay.
I love that. I thought the costume design in this was great. Especially with Lisa Swallows, it really was giving me like Lydia Dietz Beetlejuice vibes.
How do you cast your character and name her Lisa Swallows and we don't get one joke with that name in the whole movie?
Well, I thought that was kind of interesting because
I think it's obviously intentional, and Diablo Cody chose to not do that because it's probably like the lowest hanging fruit. But I was like, how do you not have like a scene where she's like getting bullied or some of the girls are being nasty and talking about her behind her back or something? It was just interesting because those scenes do exist in the movie, but no one makes a swallowing joke. I don't know.
That is an interesting thought. Well, and I thought there was a couple times, I can't think of another one, but I do remember, when I was in the theater, there was a couple times I was like, it's kind of interesting. There's a joke here, and Diablo like purposefully doesn't go at it. So I was like, it's interesting that she's like picking her spot. She's like a sports player.
Well, yeah, it's either we give the charitable reading of obviously she knows what she's doing. She's not going to, go for the low hanging fruit, or she's losing her edge to some degree and not giving the people what they want. I guess that probably goes either way on how you feel with the movie as a whole. But it was just the sort of thing where I was like, oh, some of this writing every now and then, I don't think it holds up to what I remember from, like, let's say Juno or even like Tully from a couple of years ago. There were just, I think the way people spoke so much in 1989 was also not in this movie. It was very much, everyone kind of sounded like they were still in like Jennifer's Body to be. All the mans and dudes and all that stuff, like the way they were,
Yeah,
the
no,
dialogue.
I agree with that. And I thought that was interesting because I was very curious going into this. Was Diablo Cody going to try to aim this at like Gen Z, and who obviously the target audience for this is like a younger teenage audience?
Yeah, I've heard that this movie is like doing the rounds on TikTok, like quite heavily. Like My brother and his girlfriend, who are a few years younger than us, they said like they saw it like all over TikTok, and they even had like a couple of friends going to see it purely because of TikTok. So
yeah, well, and you know, I thought it was embodying. This is something I've seen a couple of YouTube videos about recently. You know, I'm not on TikTok like heavy, but I guess there's a whole like you know, there's a whole section of like BookTok. And it's called like Weird Girl Vibes. And it's like books about weird girls. Yeah. And it's like a horror-ish vibe. And it's like this vibe. I was like, this is like Weird Girl Book Talk vibe. Everything I've seen, like this is the aesthetic, the feel, like everything about it is like kind of that. It's very Beetlejuice. It's very like rom-com, funny horror comedy.
It might be mean to say this, but this movie's very Gill coded. When I was watching this, I was like, Jill should have been on the Now
She really
Slaying
should
review
have.
of this, because this is like when she, you know, talks about her smut and talks about, you know, Minotaur milking or whatever she's getting on with. This is a movie when I was watching it, I was like, yeah, this is Jill vibes. And where you're talking about the weird book talk, I bet Jill is also familiar with that as well.
But yeah, like I thought, you know, Catherine Newton, who hasn't had a great run on Now Slaying, obviously that, you know, whatever that, It's a Wonderful Knife, that was what it was called.
Wait, was she even in that?
Yeah, I think we also had this exact same conversation of you going, was she in that when we did the preview of 2024?
What? I'm looking, she's not in it.
I thought she was in that one.
No, she's not in it.
Oh, geez, I had written down that she was in it.
No, she was on Freaky, but I don't think we covered that on the show. I think that was before our Now Slaying time. She was in Freaky and Ant-Man and the Wasp, Quantumania.
Oh, maybe she wasn't in that one. That's weird. I thought we talked about her. I don't know. Yeah. Interesting. Anyway.
So what are your thoughts on Catherine Newton then? I guess maybe not very good.
No, I like Catherine Newton. It seems to me, maybe you said before, are you not the Catherine Newton fan? I thought there was someone on the podcast.
I don't think I'm a big fan of her. I mean, I'm looking at like what she's been in, and it's just kind of whatever for me. It's like she's Ant-Man and the Wasp. She was recasted as Scott Lang's daughter, and obviously, you know, she was nothing in that. She had nothing to work with.
I thought she was great in this. I thought like she's literally a perfect muse for Diablo Cody. I was like, she just kind of has that vibe. She gives off that essence. Like, I thought whether or not you like the dialogue, like I thought she did a good delivery of it. I thought the cast of this was overall pretty good. I'm always super excited to see Carla Gugino, yeah. Who, great mean mom character. Like, I thought really awesome, really giving off that like Edward Scissorhands, early Tim Burton vibe of just like kind of weird, like just weird characterization. And then, you know, I think probably what, to me, I haven't seen this blow up on TikTok. I'm not in those circles.
No, neither.
But I would suspect Cole Sprouse would, you know, bring the ladies in. The Heartthrob of Riverdale, which was like a Netflix powerhouse show.
I was going to say The Sweet Life in Zach and Cody. That's all I know him from.
Oh, no. The star of Riverdale, essentially.
Oh, geez. Okay.
And I mean, that show went for like 8 seasons or something. Like that had legs.
Never spent a second of my life watching it.
Love it. I'm a big Riverdale guy. So, like, I thought he was pretty good too. Obviously, like, no dialogue in this. But did there really need to be? He's there as the attractive heartthrob Frankenstein monster character, right?
Would you say he's attractive and a heartthrob for most of this movie, though?
I mean, I think...
Or only for the weird girls, like Jill. Would she think he's attractive?
I think because everyone knows that it's Cole Sprouse underneath, and they're like, yeah, we just want to get to the Cole Sprouse part where we see more Cole Sprouse.
So I never even knew it was Cole Sprouse, and obviously, you know, I know him from Sweet Life of Zach and Cody, so it's literally like, I don't even view him as like this sexual being. He was like a child, right? So when I was watching this, I was like, I don't even know who this guy is. I literally thought it was like a nobody. I thought it'd be like, if you told me his name, it'd be like, oh, it's Joe Blow from the street, you know, and then Diablo Cody wouldn't make a joke that his name was Joe Blow, you know? That was essentially the character that I thought. I just thought he was literally like some nobody. I thought like the physical comedy that he was doing most of the time was pretty bad. It was just like, you know, limping around or, you know, lumbering around, some grunting every now and then. It was just, I don't know. It was bizarre. He didn't really work for me. And I guess there is obviously a turn at a certain point in the movie where we are supposed to buy into him as a little bit more of a heartthrob. But still, I guess I just never recognized him. I never once saw that character as like a good romantic lead. It was more like for the weird girls, I guess, that are just, kind of horny and obsessed with, like, let's say, losing their virginity or something. It was, I was like, okay, maybe you could hook up with a monstrous Cole Sprouse, I guess.
In my theater, I was the only guy in this movie. It was all women, like mostly like teenagers and like early 20s, I would say. And I'm just letting you know, people loved Cole Sprouse in this. The ladies loved him.
I'll take your word for it. This movie was...
They were hooting and hollering and like they loved it.
There were a couple of moments where people reacted in my theater, but it was literally like half a dozen of us again. Similar vibes as Out of Darkness. It was like me and like another weird like old guy sitting in there, and then there was like a couple of like women in the very back of the theater that just like could probably like kick back a couple of drinks and like laugh at the movie and whatnot. But yeah, I was not sold out, and it was like not all women because there was a few people, only a couple people there. So
yeah, and really, my other big thing was, I loved the soundtrack, not just because, I think I've talked about whenever we deal with an 80s or 80s themed horror movie that doesn't go for like the generic 80s in a movie music. And like, I noted this one had like When in Rome and the Zombies and Echo and the Bunnymen, the Jesus and Mary chain. Like this had like some really cool kind of new wave gothic 80s stuff that isn't normally in
a different
movies.
Language to me. I haven't even heard of, I think, most of those bands.
Yeah, so I was a big fan of like all the needle drops in this, that I was just like, yeah, I mean, this is the kind of trash I love. But here, before I talk more about it, I want to hear what you think, because I feel we're having this half, we're switching here. We're having an opposite time.
I mean, the listeners know by now. If you heard me kind of jab a couple times at this movie, this was not for me at all. I think I hated this, just to be straight up, what my ratings kind of be, basically everything I have to say about this movie. What I can say nice about it is I do think that Catherine Newton gets better as the movie goes on. I think she is absolutely terrible and miserable to watch for the first 30 minutes of this movie. Now, it's intentionally so because she's supposed to be this mute, lifeless character. Obviously, they're going like for a goth vibe, but there's also like a tragic backstory here for a reason as to why she has this excuse to be essentially mute, similar to the monster when they first arrive, or actually no, just always mute. But I just very much didn't enjoy watching her as this mute character. Essentially, when the monster shows up and the movie starts to get a little bit more silly, or at least premise-wise it starts getting sillier, I did think she was better. That's when she can actually be like an actress and actually, communicate and talk and deliver funny lines. Outside of kind of like that progression, I don't really think there was much for me to really enjoy here. I do think there is a nice little animated credit sequence to begin this movie that's kind of Tim Burton-esque that I thought was interesting. It kind of was like, okay, this is the vibe. And they do like pay homage to that at a certain point, which is obviously bringing back the animation for a certain scene, but also there's this like dream sequence that's essentially black and white, cool period costumes that it almost feels like she's in a trip to the moon, like that early movie that we've all seen numerous times. Or seen referenced numerous times. I doubt many of us have actually watched it, but I mean, we know, the creepy moon with, the rocket in its eye, we all know that. That I thought like that was a cool sequence. And other than that, I don't really have anything nice to say about the movie, I guess. Like, I thought stylistically, outside of maybe some set design, specifically in her room, I thought it was all pretty ugly looking.
Fantastic posters in the room.
Well, once again, in her room. But, like, if you expand outwards, I think a lot of it looked pretty bad. I thought the movie just looked cheap overall. And the main thing is what I will say is I don't think in her first movie that Zelda Williams has good timing at all. And this was the sort of thing when I was watching it, I just felt like all of the comedic timing was off, and all the lines, even though like if we just would read them, they could be kind of funny or you might like smirk at them. I just think the editing was completely off. I think that the camera work did nothing to accentuate the visual gags, and then like the sound cues and whatnot wouldn't be there either. So it was just, for me, it was like all these kind of setups where this should be funny to get a laugh from me, but literally I'd say 95% of the time I didn't laugh. There were a couple of moments where, you know, people in my audience did laugh, but once again, I'm talking about like on one hand, probably in this whole movie, like people laughed, and that's not a Diablo Cody script. You know, as much as I don't like some of her other movies, she writes very smart and clever characters that are really wry and cynical and sarcastic and whatnot. That winds up being, you know, very funny, like when you're watching it. It was just, for me, it was just basically the movie did nothing to enhance the script. And the moments that people were laughing at were very, very small moments, mostly on the part of Catherine Newton. And it'd be like physical comedy in reaction to somebody saying, mostly in the latter half of the movie. Like, let's say if someone was talking about how someone has a big dick and you'd see like her eyes go wide for like, you know, half a second or something like that. The women in the back would like laugh at that, where it was just like, there was nothing that was set up by the movie or the script. Whenever people would laugh, it was almost like a very small moment that it's like, oh, that was clearly just Catherine Newton decided to make a choice in the scene. Or, you know, maybe with the Laffy Taffy character, it was nothing that the movie actually did. So for me, it was just like, there's not really a horror movie here to really, as a general horror, you know, fan, to really like. I didn't think the rom-com stuff worked for me. Like, once again, I said Cole Sprouse was just whatever. I didn't care for him at all. And it was just, I felt like this was very amateurish. I felt like this was very cheap, which it definitely wasn't. But it felt like very mishandled to me, I guess, overall.
Yeah, which is interesting because I had complete opposite notes, really. Like, my top note was like, to me, I was like, this is kind of a gateway horror, PG horror that I thought was done kind of right. Like, I thought
that I don't know if this is a PG horror, is it? Like,
yeah, it's only 13, PG-13, PG-14. I mean, you know, they'll like, obviously, like, when, you know, when people die, they you know, like, they kill.
I guess you're right. It was more so like the sexual, like, suggestive themes. I was wondering, like, I was like, would it be enough in there to teeter it? But yeah, PG-13. So
yeah, and to me, you know, I thought this was good enough, you know, to warrant that. I thought like some of the kill stuff was fun, and you know, I guess when I watched this, I was obviously thinking about like a younger audience watching it, because obviously I'm not like the main demo for this, but I did enjoy it. But I was like, you know what? Like, I think this is kind of cool. I think this would help people get into like other films that they're like, hey, you know, if you like this, you might like this, or, you know, hopefully get them to watch Jennifer's Body. But, you know, I did have some issues. I did say there's definitely a couple sections that I felt dragged out a bit, where like nothing happened really to propel the story. You know, I thought, I think this was like a 140 something runtime. Like,
yeah,
this probably could have done with some more editing to cut that down, just because I think it would have sped it up a little bit and maybe helped what you're talking about with some of the comedic timing and stuff. I just think it needed to be quicker.
Oh yeah, it needed to be quicker and snappier. Just overall, like, I think I could literally take a scene from this movie that obviously, let's say, is like two people talking. Obviously, they're in a zany situation. They're cracking a couple of jokes. And I think I could literally narrate how awkward this whole scene is. And not intentionally awkward. I mean, like, how each shot hangs slightly too long. How it doesn't cut properly when they deliver the punchline. How, like, there's nothing in here. It feels to me like a short film that like someone made in high school at moments, where it's like you're still figuring out the proper editing and like how to, you know, set your movie up to kind of deliver what it needs to be, like, you know, to make these moments really land. Like, to me, it was just, it was all like technical stuff. It was all stuff that it was like, you know, maybe Zelda Williams will learn like when she probably undoubtedly goes on to make another movie. But it was just, for me, it felt very amateurish. And this is the sort of thing, like, obviously I knew this was a directorial debut going in, but I also know that people have liked her shorts, and now it's literally the sort of thing that it's like, do I have to go watch her shorts and just see if she's a Nepo baby and that's why people like her, because everyone loves Robin Williams? Or is it literally like, oh, she just got a big budget and didn't know how to handle it? Or, you know, maybe it got butchered a little bit on the editing floor. I don't know, cutting room floor. But yeah, it wasn't something that, I don't know. I didn't enjoy it. It certainly needed to be snappier, for sure. I don't think having like 30 minutes of Catherine Newton being essentially mute and lifeless is like a good intro. You can do that for like 10 minutes, but it goes on for a long ass time. I understand you can do comparisons to kind of like Her and the Monster, about how the monster appears in Mute, and about how, you know, that character, as we've mentioned, becomes a little bit more full of life as the movie goes on. But it's just, once again, it was just, ugh. I wash my hands of it. Anything you want to say before we get to recommending it? Obviously, this is not something I'm recommending. I assume this is something you're recommending.
Yeah, I had a good time with this. I was going to say, I think people are really going to like it. I don't know. From everything I've seen, I think this is bombing right now in the box.
Oh, is it? I actually wouldn't have expected that. Like, at the box office or critically?
I think both, maybe. I don't know.
Okay.
I did get a message from Willow that asked how I liked it, and then was like, I see it's bombing. So,
oh, gotcha.
Yeah, no, I thought it was pretty good. I had a good time. Like, I'd watch it again. I definitely, you know, I was thinking what I was always thinking. I'm like, when's the 4K come out? I'll buy the 4K.
Oh God, no, not me. So that's a recommendation from you, and pick it up on 4K. And yeah, this not a recommendation for me. I mean, if it's bombing, go to the theaters and see it. I mean, once again, it's a new horror in theaters. It'd be crazy if Out of Darkness did better than this. So go support, you know, your local movie theater, I guess. And with that, I think it's time to cut to the spoiler discussion for Lisa Frankenstein. We are now in our spoiler discussion for Lisa Frankenstein. So if you've not seen Lisa Frankenstein, it's time to tune out and come back once you've seen the movie. Or keep listening if you simply don't care. Rowan, where should we start with the spoiler discussion on this? I guess maybe like the body part retrieving aspect of it, I guess. Like this movie's one of these movies that like you figure out the whole movie within 30 minutes for sure. Like as soon as the setup of essentially him not being able to hear her very well, and he gets, you know, they murder her mother, take her ear, and, you know, sew it onto, you know, Frankenstein. We know, like, okay, obviously this person's in the movie because they're going to kill him off and take this. And it's like, okay, obviously they're going to cut off. Like, for me, it was so obvious that I was like, she's obviously not going to hook up with her crush. They're going to wind up taking his dick. And then it happens an hour later. And maybe that's me just being, like, sick and twisted, but I thought it was so blatantly obvious set up right from the beginning. Did I, you know, guess that her sister was going to be cheating with him? No, but it was very much like, obviously this guy's going to wind up being a prick, right? Like, I'm not a genius.
Yeah, I mean, to me, I guess it was obvious, but I didn't hate it just because I think it had the Diablo Cody beats. I mean, to me, even in Jennifer's Body, you kind of knew where that was going. You knew, like, who's dying, like, who's getting killed. So this was, you know, I think this is just kind of part of that lineage. So, I mean, I guess to me, it was more, to me, this is a vibes movie. It's not really, you know, like technical or kills movie. It's just kind of a vibe. To me, I just like the overall vibe. I like the little things. Like, I thought it was kind of funny that the tanning bed was basically, you know, the Dr. Frankenstein's. Yeah, like I thought
that's a cute beat. I agree.
I thought like stuff with that was kind of cute, and you know, it was funny that she had him wear what did it say? It was like violent femme.
Yeah.
Yeah, like which I said was pretty wild. Like, I wonder how many teenagers were wearing that in the 80s. Like, I was like, that's pretty punk rock of her.
Well, that was kind of like, I thought maybe it was just a band or something I didn't even know. Right?
Yeah, I mean, maybe. And you know, like I said, like this is, I think the hard thing is that everyone's going to compare it to Jennifer's Body. And it's not that, because Jennifer's Body is like a rated R horror movie, where this isn't. Like, this is aimed much younger, so there's only so much they can do, I guess. So, you know, you're left with the gags of, like, creepy bugs falling out of him just randomly all the time, and
his tears being super smelly.
Yeah,
you know?
Stuff being super smelly and things like that. And that is one of the things that I had kind of thought, is that I wondered how this could have been as another rated R Diablo Cody horror movie. I was like, maybe this would have been better if they could have pushed the envelope with the Frankenstein and like killing boys in this town. Although they do kill girls too. But you know, like, killing people that are hurting our, like, main character, you know, if that could have been a little more brutal, a little more, you know, our horror would have been a little more fun to be able to do stuff like that.
This is one of those that I don't think needs to be rated R, though. Like, for the sort of movie it's making, like, it is a very, like, PG-13 premise. Like, it is just, like, a love story with a little bit of blood being shed, essentially. So, I mean, I guess in terms of the gore, you could have made it more fun. You could have had people curse a little bit more. But once again, like, people weren't talking like that in the movie anyways. Like, everyone was just saying dude and man and stuff all the time, which I know, I wasn't born in 1989. Maybe people spoke that way. It just felt like, once again, this felt like a script that was made for the mid-2000s to me. And I would have preferred it if it was in the mid-2000s because, at least for me, it would have been a little bit more nostalgic of the scene and emo kid era rather than, I guess, the goth era or whatever it was going for. And it's not a time period that is, like, done to death. I'm so sick of 80s movies, like movie set in the 80s. We put a little bit of neon lighting. We put a big lamp outside shining a blue light in through the window. It's an 80s movie. It's like, I'm sick of that shit. And I'm also sick of it when it's not lit well and it just looks really flat. And most of the movie just looks like a sitcom with funky costumes. And that's what it like looked like to me. And obviously I understand a lot of the movie is supposed to be kind of tongue-in-cheek. It's supposed to be silly. But once again, when the movie's not taking itself seriously, I kind of wind up like, what? This is just a waste of my time. There's nothing for me to take seriously here, because whenever I criticize this movie, it's basically going to be like, oh, you just didn't get it. And it's like, no, I got it. I just think there was a lot here that was just very amateurish or not well executed. There is a version of this movie that I like. It's just, I think the script needed to be punched up. I think they should have changed some of the pacing. It should have been slightly shorter. And yeah, I think it needed to be a lot snappier, a lot more clever, which it wasn't. This felt like a script that I saw 20 years ago almost when Diablo Cody was like blowing up. It's just, it's like everything that she was saying back then is she's still saying now, which kind of leads me to think that maybe she knows how to write one sort of movie and one sort of character, which is fine. It's just I'm kind of tired of seeing that. I think Tully was trying to write a different character, I guess. I don't know if our listeners are familiar with that, but like the mom with the Fight Club aspects and whatnot, it's a little bit of a different movie. But yeah, I don't know. I don't really have anything to say spoilery for this movie. Like they kill 3 people in it. We could talk about that. The mom dies, which we mentioned. They kill kind of like this pervy nerd at a party that puts his hand on her breast when she's having a drug trip because someone spiked her drink. And then yeah, they kill the guy at the end of it, like the heartthrob, I guess, right? They chop off his dick and we get a scene of everyone reacting, screaming, and a silhouetted dildo flying through the air. It's I
mean, my favorite thing of the whole thing was the joke with the back massager, which the minute
lowest hanging fruit,
I know, but like my audience loved it, laughed, they were crying laughing at that. Like the minute he brings it up, like everyone knew what it was. And like the minute she's like telling the story of like, oh, my aunt got it for me, it's a back massager. Everybody was just laughing at it. And I could see like, like I said, I'm trying to put myself in like a teenage mindset that, maybe that lowest hanging fruit is, their level of comedy that they like.
That seems like a joke to me that literally would have been made in a late 80s movie or like a mid 90s movie. Like, obviously it'd be like the boyfriend discovering something in the closet and be like, oh, what's this? And you'd be like, oh, don't worry about that. And you'd kind of like cut away and the audience would know about it. But it wasn't something that was at all clever. Like I've definitely seen that beat, and probably even with like literally like the magic wand, a vibrator in another movie. It was like the only thing that was interesting about that beat to me was like, oh, I guess that's what a vibrator looked like in the 80s, right? Like, because it just looked like a slightly more mechanical. It's like, discovering like an ancient, piece of technology. That was the only thing interesting about that scene to me at all. It was just so obvious, obviously, where it's going. And it's like, is it like really funny nowadays? Like, I guess maybe I'm just old and jaded. I'm just like, I don't really know what's so funny about a vibrator being featured or like being like, women masturbate too. It's like, okay, cool, dude. I knew that for 20 years. Like, I don't know what to say, right? It's like they felt like that was a great comedic. It's literally set up and then it's brought back and then it's like a romantic moment that's kind of funny. It's like, they spend a lot of time on this vibrator, this back massager as like this, pinnacle of comedy for, 5-10 minutes of this movie. And I'm glad you enjoyed it. I was just like, this is once again, it was just like, it's obvious.
Like I said, I think it's a vibe. I did think it was interesting that, we never got him a tongue. I thought for sure at some point we would get him a tongue.
So he could talk? Yeah.
I figured you'd get Cole Sprouse talking. I mean, like I said,
we do right
icon.
At the very end of the movie with absolutely terrible scene, but we do get that,
Yeah, we do get him reading at the end. But yeah, no, just no one ever thought to get him a ton the whole movie, which, didn't surprise me. I think that's definitely on purpose. Obviously, Diablo Cody writes some strong feminist points in her films, and I think it's always an interesting choice to kind of have your male lead quiet throughout the movie.
Yeah, it's an interesting choice. I do think the tongue is pretty involved when you're, getting intimate, and so it probably would have been a nice thing to include.
If his tears stink, I'm sure his breath is absolutely terrible.
Well, we don't need to get into what else stinks and whatnot, especially with the third act of this movie, where, they finally seal the deal. So
yeah, I mean, the only thing I kind of wondered with this, because like I said, I mean, I don't think, or at least it seems, we probably won't really know until next week, but it doesn't seem this is translating into people storming in the theaters to see it. I was wondering, maybe this will find better life on streaming. Does this seem more like a streaming film?
Yeah, this is one of those where obviously if it's not performing well in theaters, I say sure, go support your theaters, obviously. But this to me very much felt like a Netflix joint. And I know we always harp on Netflix of everything's lit poorly, it all looks the same. This looked like a Netflix movie. I'm sorry, it did. It, wholeheartedly. So yeah, I mean, I think it will find second life on a streamer. I don't know who it'll pick it up. I could see it literally being on Amazon or Netflix pretty easily. It'd fit in with a lot of the other things they have.
Yeah, well, and I just kind of thought, I'm interested just to see over time how it does, because I mean, also, Jennifer's Body never really became a classic till years and years afterwards when it came out, that it kind of got reevaluated. And I don't know, man, I kind of, like I said, I got that Warm Bodies, Jennifer Body's vibe where I really feel that this might pick up legs as the years go by, people discover this. And like I said, even though I kind of enjoyed the vibe and connected with it, this isn't for us. This isn't made for us. So it doesn't surprise me that maybe we won't connect with it as strong as others may.
Yeah, once again, I just go back to my audience wasn't connecting with it either. Now, maybe I should have went at the evening showing. I think I went at 6 o'clock or something. So if I went to the 8 or 9, maybe it would have had more of its target demographic if it's truly not a disastrous box office situation. But my movie viewing experience between this and Out of Darkness were essentially identical. I did a double feature, both of them back to back. Everyone was quiet, essentially, in both of them. Lisa Frankenstein, people piped up maybe 3 to 4 times, like I said, throughout the movie. I just can't remember the specific comedic beats now, but once again, they were smaller, character moments rather than, the strength of the movie. It was more this is a silly sequence / scenario they're in, and it was more physical comedy that seemed almost improv based on the cast more than something that was set up by the strength of Diablo Cody's script, which is someone who, I've written things. I just thought the script was really going to sing with this one, I guess, where once again, it just felt something that it was very similar. The character in this movie speaks how the character in Juno speaks, which is just if this movie was set in 2006, I'd be yeah, sure, it works. 1989, I wasn't alive back then, but I don't think people were speaking how they do in 2006, or 2008, whenever Juno came out. So it was just a thing that was a constant bump for me. It was just strange. I just wonder why they felt the need to set this in 1989. Just looking real quickly, this and Jennifer's Body are rated pretty similar critically. It does seem that Jennifer's Body did make double its budget in theaters, though. So, I mean, I don't know if it was viewed as a box office failure, but by Hollywood math, that would be breaking even. So maybe it didn't do quite as bad, or maybe it just didn't do what they were expecting with Megan Fox at the time coming off of Transformers and stuff. But yeah, I mean, I would expect this to have a little niche audience for it. I'd expect there to be a group of people that really like this movie. It's just sadly it's not really a movie for me. With that, anything else we should discuss before getting into rating it? All right. So if you're new to the podcast, our review rubric is nay, okay, yay, or slay. So Rowan, what would you give Lisa Frankenstein.
So I'm going to give it a yay. I really enjoyed it. I did the Rowan thing. I came out of it and it was total vibes. I was like, oh, am I going to slay this? And I was like, I can't do that. Because like I said, I do like Jennifer's Body way more than I like this. I think when we, way back in the day reviewed Jennifer's Body, I think I gave it a slay. So this one I'll give it a yay for now. And I mean, who knows? I might watch this again. I might notice some of the stuff you talked about. It might go down. It might go up over time. I don't know. But my viewing, I thought it was, I thought it was a vibe. I thought it was cute. I enjoyed it. I thought it was a pretty good time. I really don't have much else to say about it. What about you, Colton? Is that a big slay from you, or?
Oh yeah, instant slay, gonna be in my rotation all the time, obviously. No, obviously, this is an A from me. I don't need to belabor the points anymore. I found it pretty miserable to sit through, outside of a couple of just like funny moments, or like things like you mentioned, the tanning bed, that were just like cute. That one sequence where it's the dream sequence and they kind of flash back and kind of like frame it as if it's like a movie from the 20s or 30s, I thought was interesting. I like that a lot. And some of the animated trappings that the movie would have, I think it happens like one other time in the movie, I thought was interesting. Outside of that, it just wasn't for me. I think personally, for the reason I didn't like it is mostly because the script just felt like it didn't fit in the 1980s for me, which once again, you can just say like, oh, that was intentional. Obviously, they just want to make a silly script. But more so, I think for me, it's the direction. I think so much of it just didn't land and really like accentuate the comedic beats or like play up the romance that should have been there, or even the horror. It was just all felt so trite to me and just felt like it wasn't really worth my time overall. So yeah, it's a nay from me. But if you're listening to this, I hope you do like it. Obviously, it's just, yeah, it's not at all my thing. And as Rowan said, it's for a different audience, but sadly, I'm still the one who has to review it. So it's an A from me. And if you made it this far on the show, you're not following us already, you can do so at It Slays Podcast. We're on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, Slasher, Letterboxd, Threads, Blue Sky. I think Blue Sky is actually open to the public now, so maybe I'll actually start using that a little bit more. But if there's a social media, we're probably there at It Slays Podcast. And if you want to help support the show financially, like our horror hounds Holly, Nicholas, Patrick, Mark, Stephen, Joy, Carvey, Dan, Brian, and Trevor, gain access to the Patreon exclusive show Stream Screams, hosted by Gill, and get episodes of the main show 48 hours early. Be sure to head on over to patreon.com/itslayspodcast and choose whatever tier works best for you. Also, just as a side note, let us know if you like this now slaying double feature thing. Do you prefer if we break out the episodes? I mean, it doesn't happen very often, but, when we have two movies that are released on the same weekend, should we keep doing it this way? Should we break them up, expand it? Just, maybe just send us a DM or something. Let us know, because, once again, this was a bit of an experiment. And with that, Rowan, go ahead, plug the playlist.
Yeah, so if you want to get your spooky music on, you can go to Spotify, to the It Slays Podcast Horrific playlist. If you have any problems finding it, you can go to any of the social media that Colton mentioned beforehand. Go to the bio. There's a Linktree link. Click it. It'll take you right there. We upload scores or licensed music from iconic horror movies or horror movies we review or just horror movies we love. So yeah, go check out the playlist, follow it, and get your spooky music on, because why the hell not?
And next time on the show, we have a couple of things kicking around. There was a movie that we mentioned called Baghead that is supposed to be releasing in like a week or so, but I don't know if it'll be doing like the rounds in theaters.
Yeah.
So the next big thing coming out is Imaginary, which is that I think it's Blumhouse, right?
Yeah,
Blumhouse,
Blumhouse.
Yeah, sinister teddy bear movie. So maybe that'll be the next thing. I'm sure something will crop up. That's in like a month's time. So, and with that, I think that about wraps things up for this episode. So until next time, I'm Colton.
I'm Rowan.
And as long as you keep listening, we'll keep slaying.